Okay, so let's make a start by looking at cardiovascular system. So on the next chapter that we'll cover, we'll really discuss about the heart and then briefly visit the different blood vessels. And here's the plan for this class. So we'll talk a little bit about the heart anatomy first, and then on subsequent videos, we'll have a look of the heart physiology. And like I mentioned, we'll also briefly touch upon on the various different blood vessels that we have. But what I really wanted to do to start this session was to put kind of everything together on a bigger picture. So when we think of the function of the cardiovascular system at large, it really is a transportation system. So we're transporting oxygen, we're transporting nutrients, and we're also transporting waste products and hormones. So this transportation is not just to the tissues, but away from the tissues as well. So a bunch of things there to consider. And today we'll start by discussing the heart. And like I mentioned, we'll briefly talk about the blood vessels as well. In next chapter that we'll have a look of, we'll discuss the blood in a little bit more detail. So if you want to kind of form a general idea of the cardiovascular system and how these different parts fit into that, we can consider heart as the pump that moves everything else within this system. And the blood is what's being moved around. And we can consider blood vessels as the tubing where this blood then travels in. So I hope that that helps to kind of put it all together. Typically, when we talk about the heart in a layman's language, we see that there's a lot of expressions that allocate things like a soul or a personality or so on to the heart. I think some of the examples that I can immediately think would be to say that someone is kind-hearted, or that they have a heart of stone, or being heartless, or someone being all heart. So what that really tells us is that the heart is so important for our survival that historically we have associated a lot of functions that we now know to be within the brain, especially the frontal cortex, to the heart. So that's where some of the misconceptions might originate from. And before we go any further talking about the heart, I also wanted to kind of loop back to a concept that you're familiar from our first chapters of the semester together. So we should talk about the muscle tissues. And you remember that we covered the skeletal muscles earlier on? And today our focus will be on the cardiac muscle. So cardiac muscle cell, let's have a look at that a little bit more. Cardiac muscle cells are uninucleate. That means that they have one nucleus, and that's located typically centrally to that cell. And we'll also see that cardiac muscle cells are striated. We'll talk a little bit more about the branched appearance of these cardiac muscle cells and the intercalated discs. And I also wanted to mention that obviously we will see cardiac muscle cells only in the heart. So no other part of the body will have this type of a muscle cell. And these are obviously our involuntary cells, so they function autonomically. But let's unbundle a little bit more what I wanted to say about the cardiac muscle cells often being highly branched and having these intercalated discs. And what that really tells us is about the function of the cardiac muscle tissue. So these intercalated discs are located at the end of these branches, so they provide us an easy passageway for materials and also messages to move across from one cell to another. And that's really the reason why we also see a lot of branches. We want to make sure that each cell, cardiac muscle cell on the same area, contracts simultaneously so we can create this synchronized beating pattern of the cardiac muscle tissue. That's how we're able to create that contraction of the different chambers of the heart and pump the blood in an organized manner through the cardiovascular system. Another thing that I wanted to highlight here regarding the cardiac muscle and cardiac muscle cells is that we're going to end up finding a lot of mitochondria within these cells. And this really is explained by the fact that cardiac muscle tissue needs a lot of energy. So production of ATP is going to be of a priority for us. So if we think of the cardiac tissue, heart, muscle, it is always working early on from the prenatal development all the way to the death. So heart really never gets to take a rest in that sense. It's one of those tissues that's constantly actively at work. So now that we've had just kind of a general look of the putting at the cardiology into a bigger picture, I think we should talk about the heart in more detail. And let's start by looking at the location of the heart. So heart is located within the thoracic cavity, so our chest cavity, right between the lungs. So it's surrounded kind of tightly within there. If we try to position where in that chest cavity heart is located, it's between the ribs 2 and 5 where you'll end up finding that. Heart rests on top of the diaphragm, so that major respiratory muscle. And if we think of the location of the heart, it is pretty close to the midline of the body, just slightly, a little bit left from there. And remember, when we're talking about left and right, it's always in relation to the patient's left and right. Another thing that I think that this slide shows us really well is a structure known as apex. So apex is the tip of the heart. And if we think of the location of the tip of the heart, it is pointing anteriorly, so to the front, inferiorly, so to the down, and slightly left. So that helps us to position the heart within our chest cavity. And as you've seen me using in this analog, my fist as an example of the heart, that is actually a really good analog because our heart is roughly fist-sized organ. So that helps you to have an idea of the size of the heart in a newborn versus an adult. So usually their fist is a pretty good comparison to what size we're seeing there. In terms of the weight of the heart, it's typically less than a pound in weight. Obviously, heart is like any other muscle. You can train it, it can grow bigger, it can be smaller. It's proportional to the body size. So we're talking about averages here. Another thing that I wanted to discuss about is the fact that heart is located inside a sac-like structure. So let's look at the layers around the heart in a little bit more detail. And these layers are known as our pericardium. So pericardium is this two-layered sac around the heart. And we will see this hopefully when we're dissecting our heart samples during the labs, provided that we've been lucky enough to get a little bit higher quality hearts to work from. So the outermost, the most superficial layer that we're going to be seeing is our fibrous pericardium. This is loose and, like I said, very superficial structure. We also have two layers of serous membrane that we're going to see. So we're going to see our parietal pericardium, which forms the outside layer that lines the inner surface of the fibrous pericardium. And then we're going to see our visceral pericardium, which is located right next to the heart and actually blends into epicardium, the first layer of the heart wall layer that we'll talk about a little later. But now that we've defined our parietal pericardium and our visceral pericardium, I wanted to look at the space in between these two serous membrane layers. And this space is known as our pericardial cavity. And this pericardial cavity is filled with serous fluid. And a comparison that I often give to my students in a class is to consider a Ziploc bag. And when you have a little bit of liquid in between those layers of the Ziploc bag, they slide past each other really nicely and easily. And that's important for our heart to be able to do its job, contract and expand and shrink as it does its job of pumping the blood. So that fluid within the pericardial cavity is important. I also wanted to mention here a clinical example for us to consider as it relates to these structures. So inflammation of pericardium is known as pericarditis. And this causes these membranes to become kind of rougher. As they rub against each other, we hear this creaking sound, which can be picked up with a stethoscope. So that's one of the many reasons why we might listen the patient's chest with a stethoscope to see here if there's anything that's unusual with the sounds. And one of the unusual sounds would be this creaking sound of the pericarditis. So let's return back to the previous picture that we saw, however. And here what I'm highlighting now is the three layers of the heart wall itself. So we're going to see that the visceral layer of the pericardium turns into epicardium. This is really the outside layer of the heart wall. Then we're going to see myocardium, which is the middle layer and mostly made of cardiac muscle. And finally, we're also going to see endocardium. This is the innermost layer, known as endothelium. And this is in direct contact with the blood that's located inside the chambers of the heart. Again, a little bit of clinical relevance in medical language. Itis, as you are familiar with, refers to inflammation of a particular part. So myocarditis would be referring to the inflammation of the myocardium, this muscle layer of the heart. This weakens the heart and its electrical system if we have myocarditis. Endocarditis instead is the inflammation of the endocardium, and this is typically caused by infection and also places the heart valves at risk. So they are often treated, these endocarditis, with antibiotics. Now that we've had a look of the general location of the heart and structures around the heart, I want to focus on the heart chambers. And if you were ever asked to draw a heart, this hollow organ made of 4 chambers, the simplest way to draw it really is to draw a box and then divide it into 4 parts. And when we start naming the chambers, do remember again, when we're talking about right and left, it's always in relation to the patient's right and left. So keep that in mind on these discussions. So like I kind of led us into thinking, we do have right and left side of the heart, and each one is composed of 2 chambers. And the chambers on top are known as our atria. So we're going to have right atria and left atria. And these are chambers that receive the blood coming into the heart. And this blood entering in will come with low pressure. From there, this blood moves to the ventricles. So the chambers at the bottom are going to be our ventricles, so left and right ventricle, and they are responsible for pumping out blood from the heart. Therefore, these have a very thick wall in comparison to the atria that we saw earlier. And this blood goes to the circulation via blood vessels, and we'll have a look at those blood vessels a little bit later. But at this point, we have this 4-chambered appearance of our box diagram of the heart. Let's return back to that. So we have our simple heart diagram here, and notice that I use abbreviations to mark these chambers, simply to save our time. So right atrium RA, left atrium LA, right ventricle RV, and left ventricle LV. We can also add into this diagram the blood flow through the chambers of the heart. How about we do that? So what we see, and let's start on the left upper corner, we see that the deoxygenated blood, which is symbolized with blue color on this diagram. So this is the blood that contains little oxygen, is low in oxygen concentration. That is being collected from the circulation of the body. And now this deoxygenated blood is entering to the right atria through our superior vena cava, often abbreviated as SVC, and our inferior vena cava, often abbreviated as IVC. And this blood builds up to our right atria, and then it moves from the right atria to the right ventricle. And this movement happens through a valve that we'll talk in a little bit of time, but if you want to make a head start, you can notice that this valve separating the right atria and right ventricle is known as our right AV valve, also known as our tricuspid. And now the blood has moved from the right atria to the right ventricle, and we start pumping the blood out by squeezing the right ventricle now, and the blood rushes through another valve. This is going to be separating our right ventricle from our pulmonary trunk. And this valve, again, if you want to make a head start, is known as our right semilunar valve, or it's also known as a pulmonary valve. So the blood gets squashed out of the right ventricle and it now goes to the pulmonary trunk. On this diagram, I've drawn that part kind of as a dotted line because it really doesn't return back to the right atria, and the pulmonary trunk kind of rests on top of the right atria. So just to simplify the diagram, keep that on mind. So blood travels to the pulmonary trunk. That then is going to divide into pulmonary arteries. And again, remember that this blood that's traveling now out of the right ventricle is going to be deoxygenated. Typically in our arteries, we would see this bright red blood, but because this blood is now going to the pulmonary circulation, so to the lungs, it's actually going to be, as it leaves to the pulmonary arteries, it's going to be deoxygenated. So it's going to be blue on this diagram. Now the blood goes to the lungs where it gets oxygenated, and it comes back to the heart as this bright red, highly oxygenated blood. So let's have a look of that. So this oxygenated blood, which means that it's rich in oxygen, and now is returning from the lungs, and it's going to return to the heart through 4 pulmonary veins. And again, typically we think that our veins carry deoxygenated blood, so blue blood, but in case of pulmonary circulation, pulmonary veins actually carry highly oxygenated blood, so it's going to be this bright red. And this blood enters to the left atria, and from the left atria, blood moves to the left ventricle. And it moves to the left ventricle through a valve. And again, if you wanted to make a head start, you could note that separating the left atria from the left ventricle is going to be our left AV valve. This is also known as a bicuspid valve. And another name that sometimes gets used for this valve is mitral valve. Regardless, now the blood that's rich in oxygen is in our left ventricle, and we're ready to squeeze the blood out of the left ventricle to our aorta and then to our systemic circulation. And there's going to be a valve separating the left ventricle from our aorta. This is going to be our left semilunar valve. This is also known as our aortic valve. And now blood moves to the aorta. And again, aorta is resting kind of on top of the left atria. So I've drawn it as a dotted line on this diagram. And from aorta, the blood that's now rich in oxygen travels to the systemic circulation. So all other parts of the vasculature except the pulmonary circulation. So we've seen our heart chambers, the right atria, right ventricle, and left ventricle. And we've even seen the blood flow through these chambers in this kind of a box diagram that we've used. But we can make it a little bit more, I would say, anatomically accurate. So let's do that on our next diagram. We're seeing the exactly same arrangement. We're seeing the right atria receiving the blood from superior and inferior vena cava, pumping the blood through a valve to the right ventricle, and then right ventricle passing the blood to the pulmonary trunk through another valve. We see also blood returning back to the heart, to the left atria. In this case, we've only drawn one of those vessels. Blood is returning to the heart on the left-hand side, passing another valve to the left ventricle, and then from the left ventricle, it's traveling through a valve to the aorta. And from there to the rest of the body. And again, if we wanted, we could add the colored arrows to make this flow a little bit easier to follow along. Again, I encourage you to kind of put pieces together as you're looking at. On this diagram that's anatomically a little bit more accurate, you can see how this pulmonary trunk and aorta actually cross, and as a result, the diagram is not quite as clear as the box diagram, but that might explain those dotted lines that I was drawing. Now that we are familiar, and really what I want you to take away from this is the four chambers of the heart, the two atria and two ventricle, one on the right and one on the left-hand side for each. What I want to do now is to look at the walls of these chambers a little bit more, and there's two particular walls that I want to highlight. So remember, in terminology of the medicine and anatomy, when we talk about septum, we talk about a wall. And when we use word inter, we're referring to something being in between. So the two walls that I want to highlight for us are interatrial and interventricular septums. So the interatrial septum separates the two atria, the left and right atria. So that's the wall that we're seeing on that box diagram on the top, separating the two atria. And then we have our interventricular septum that separates the two ventricles, so the right and left ventricle. It's also shown on this more anatomically accurate diagram pretty well. We couldn't see on that diagram real nicely the atrial walls being separated because they're kind of hidden between those pulmonary trunk and aorta, but the interventricular septum is definitely nicely visible there. So what I wanted to do next was to have a look of those heart valves that we already made a jump start of discussing, but let's unbundle those a little bit more. So when we think about valves, we're talking about these structures that facilitate unidirectional flow of blood. So in order to prevent the backflow, so we want the flow through the heart to be one directional, one way only. Otherwise, if we don't prevent this backflow and blood is flowing to the wrong direction, we end up really non-productive back and forth pumping of the blood. We want to make sure that the blood goes through the heart and it moves only to one direction. That's going to be really important for us. So when we're talking about heart valves, what we end up seeing is that these heart valves open and close in response to the pressure chambers in the heart chambers. And there's going to be 4 valves in total for us to consider, but we're going to divide these valves into 2 categories. Let's start with that. So first of all, we're going to see our atrioventricular valves. I often abbreviate those as AV valves. So AV valves, we find one on the right and one on the left-hand side. They separate the atria and ventricles. So again, like I said, AV valve, the clue is in the name, separating the atria and ventricle, one on each side. The semilunar valves, which I often write as shorthand as SL valves, they are responsible for separating the ventricles from subsequent major vessels. So these are going to be the arteries that leave the heart. So SL valves separates the ventricles from the major vessels. For our purposes, these are going to be our pulmonary trunk and our aorta. So let's unpack each of these major divisions of the heart valves a little bit further. And we're going to start with the AV valves. So there were 2 AV valves. Remember, the term atria in buildings is this kind of a hall-like entrance area where the people gather before entering to the offices or other rooms. So the atrioventricular valve tells us that the atria is where the blood kind of gathers and then gets pushed to the ventricle. So these atrioventricular valves are open during relaxation of the heart when the blood passively fills the atrial chambers. Then the atrioventricular valves get closed during the ventricular contraction to prevent the blood from going back to the atria, again making sure that we have this unidirectional flow. So let's unpack the atrioventricular valves a little bit more. On the right-hand side, we're going to see our right AV valve. This separates the right atria from right ventricle. We sometimes see that the right AV valve is also called tricuspid valve. And this is because there's 3 leaflets of heart valves that make up this valve. And on the left-hand side, we're going to see our left AV valve. This separates the left atria from the left ventricle. And this is also known as a bicuspid valve because now we see 2 leaflets in this AV valve. We also see another name sometimes being used at describing left AV valve. Sometimes this is referred as a mitral valve. Mitral valve really refers the term mitral to the mitrum, which is this shape of, or the mitrum is the headgear that religious people, priests wear, and the shape of that head wear is very similar to the shape of the valves of the mitral valve. Another thing that I wanted to mention before we move to semilunar valves, I wanted to unbundle a little bit more about the atrioventricular valves, an anatomical characteristic that tells us about the unique needs that they're dealing with. So because atrioventricular valves have to deal with high forces, so high blood pressure generated by the ventricles, there's an adaptation to prevent the valve from flipping inside out. We want to prevent that. And this adaptation is really twofold. First of all, we have chordae and tendineae, which are really these heartstrings, if you wish. They are like cords that anchor to the valve to the inner wall of the ventricles. In addition to that, we also see papillary muscles. These are little outgrowths of muscle from the ventricular valve, and this is where the chordae and tendineae anchor to. Notice that these 2 adaptations, chordae tendineae and papillary muscles, are only seen in AV valves. We do not see them in semilunar valves. So that completes our review of the atrioventricular valves. Instead, I want to shift our attention to the semilunar valves. And semilunar valves are closed during the heart relaxation stage. And they open during the ventricular contraction. And the reason why they open is really to pass the blood to the lungs and to the systemic circulation. And there's going to be 2 of these again. So we're going to see pulmonary valve, which separates the right ventricle from our pulmonary trunk. And then the blood goes from there to the lungs. And we're also going to see aortic valve, which separates the left ventricle from aorta. And then the blood goes to the systemic circulation and all other parts of the body but the lungs. So now that we've gone through a lot of the anatomy of the heart, I kind of want to take a step back again and consider a little bit a bigger picture, which helps us to understand why we see this difference between the left and right side of the heart. So I want to add a little more to this discussion, and I want us to consider the heart in relation to the entire larger cardiovascular system. And again, what we see here is the heart here, and we see what type of blood is carried on each side. So on the left side, we're going to see the bright red blood, the oxygenated blood that's rich with oxygen. And on the right side, we're going to see this blue blood, the deoxygenated blood with little oxygen in it. So really, if we think about that, human heart is almost like 2 pumps that form the human heart. Let's look at that a little bit more, and we're going to start from the right side. So from the right side of the heart, we're pumping the blood to the lungs. This is known as our pulmonary circuit. And there, the deoxygenated blood gets loaded with oxygen that then returns to the right side of the heart. Now to the left side of the heart. And let's look at the left side of the heart a little more. So the left side pumps the blood to the systemic circulation. All other vessels of the body except the lungs form the systemic circulation, and there the blood gives off the oxygen to the tissues and then returns back to the right side of the heart as a deoxygenated blood. And these two cycles take time, time after time after time, round after round. And for this reason, human heart is sometimes described as two hearts beating as one. So we're doing the two circulations to pass the blood, both the pulmonary and systemic circuit. So I hope that helped to put that a little bit more together. Let's again continue. And now I want us to think about the heart muscle wall itself. So just like any other tissue, the heart muscle itself needs a constant supply of oxygen and nutrients and removal of carbon dioxide and other waste products. So we need to find a way to supply the cardiac muscle tissue. And interestingly, the blood in the chambers of the heart is not enough to do this. So instead, the heart has its own circulatory system to do this. And this consists of our arteries and our veins. So what we see here is our coronary arteries. These are branches from the aorta. In fact, the first branches of the aorta right after the aortic valve, and they supply the heart muscle wall itself with oxygenated blood. And there's going to be three main branches at this level of A&P courses. You do not have to memorize those, but we see that we have our anterior interventricular artery that supplies the left ventricle and front of the heart, our circumflex artery that encircles the backside of the heart, and our right coronary artery, which supplies really the right side of the heart. And if we have arteries, we're also going to have veins. So coronary veins drain the myocardium of blood that has given off the oxygen and so on, and then collect it to the coronary sinus, which is this large vein on the posterior side of the heart. So notice this picture is showing the posterior side of the heart, backside. And this then empties into the right atrium. And few points in terms of clinical considerations. There's many conditions when the coronary circulation is inadequate. The most common, with more than 3 million cases per year in the US, is our coronary artery disease, sometimes abbreviated as CAD. Here, the arteries that we just looked at that are supposed to deliver the oxygen to the heart tissue become narrowed. And this is due to the buildup of plaque on these coronary arteries. And as a result, the delivery of blood and oxygen with the blood to the heart muscle is not as successful. And this is especially true during periods of high demand, like during exercise. And the consequences of this can range from no symptoms at all to chest pain or even to a heart attack. The treatments that we see really depend on severity. It can be lifestyle changes, it can be medications, it can be angioplasty, or it can even be surgery. And really, to kind of finalize our discussion of the heart anatomy, I think we already discussed this largely, but a few more terms to be familiar with in terms of clinical issues. Ischemia refers to when we're not having enough blood flow, and this could result in hypoxia taking place, so not enough oxygen being provided to the tissue. And this can have many severe consequences. And this could be due to many reasons. And we already talked about the buildup of plaque in relation to this. And I think that this is a good time for us to wrap up this brief review of the heart anatomy. And in our next video, we'll discuss the heart physiology a little bit more. I look forward to seeing you at that time. Until then, bye.